The hum of the Resolver's engines was a steady, reassuring sound as Captain Maya Towson stood in the observation deck, staring out at the vast expanse of space. Her hand rested on the cool glass, fingers brushing lightly against the curvature of the hull. It was strange how silent space could be, so empty, and yet so full of promise and peril. The crew had spent weeks preparing for this mission, but something gnawed at Maya's gut. The distress signal, the one that had been hidden in the farthest reaches of the galaxy for centuries, was no accident. Whatever sent it, it knew it would be found, and it wanted to be found. "Captain, you might want to see this," Commander Leia Vance called from the bridge. Maya turned, the weight of the mission pressing heavily on her shoulders. She had never been one to trust easy answers, and this situation, this mysterious cry from the abyss, had far too many unknowns. But the Council had insisted that they had no choice. If the signal was legitimate, humanity might be on the brink of discovering something greater than themselves. Or, perhaps, they were walking straight into a trap. With a sharp, determined stride, Maya crossed the threshold of the bridge. The crew members were already at their stations, monitoring the signal's trajectory and analyzing the strange fluctuations it had been emitting. Leia stood by the communications console, brow furrowed as she studied the incoming data. "It's repeating, Captain," Leia said, tapping the console, "every 23 minutes, and it's getting stronger." Maya looked over Leia's shoulder at the visual representation of the signal. The transmission was fragmented, but every pulse seemed to scream of desperation, of a civilization lost to time. It felt like a call for help. Or was it? The signal could also be a lure, a trap to draw in the curious. She'd seen too many false flags during her years in the military to ignore the possibility. "Any chance it's a trick?" Maya asked, her voice low and deliberate. Leia glanced at her, then back at the data, her expression hardening. "It's not like anything we've encountered before. The encryption is ancient, but the pattern, there's something intelligent about it. It's almost organized." Maya nodded, her mind racing through the implications. If this is a trap, it's a damn good one. The doors to the bridge opened behind them, and Lieutenant Marcus Jensen, the Resolver's chief engineer, stepped in, his face pale. Maya recognized the look, the one that said something was very wrong. "We've got problems," Marcus said bluntly. "The engine's fine, shields are holding, but there's something off about the trajectory we're on. The signal's pulling us in. Whatever's out there, it's not just the signal itself, it's guiding us." Maya's eyes narrowed. "You think it's a gravitational anomaly?" Marcus hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the notion. "Could be. Or it could be something much worse. Whatever's sending this, it knows how to manipulate space, maybe even time. We're locked into its path." A chill ran down Maya's spine. There was no turning back now. They were too close to the source of the signal. And if it was what she feared, there would be no escaping the consequences. "We're committed," Maya said, her voice steady despite the uncertainty that gripped her. "Prepare the crew. We move in 5. As the bridge came to life with orders being relayed and preparations made, Maya found herself staring at the vastness ahead. There was something haunting about the endless dark, something inescapable. But she wasn't one to shrink from the unknown. She wasn't just going to answer the cry from the void. She was going to find out what lay behind it. And she'd be damned if humanity was going to be the one caught unprepared. The Resolve sliced through the silent void, its sleek hull gleaming against the backdrop of distant stars. As the crew prepared for the unknown, an air of nervous anticipation settled over the ship. Captain Maya Towson stood at the helm, her gaze fixed on the flickering data screens as the coordinates to the source of the signal drew closer. The crew was tense, but there was a fire in their eyes. This was the kind of mission that made legends. They were on the precipice of something extraordinary, and whether it would bring salvation or destruction, they would face it together. Approaching the source, Captain, Laia Vance announced, her voice steady despite the mounting tension in the bridge. Maya nodded, trying to steady her own racing thoughts. The journey had been smooth so far, but as they neared the origin of the signal, the ship's sensors began to behave erratically. Glitching, flickering, and strange, low-frequency hums emanated from the ship's communication systems. Something in the depths of space seemed to be pressing against them, warping reality itself. Maya clenched her fists around the armrests of her chair. Whatever was out here, it had already begun to make its presence felt. "Engineering report," Maya barked. "Everything checks out," Marcus Jensen replied, his voice crackling over the comms. "But we're seeing some interference from somewhere. It's hard to pinpoint. Could be a gravitational anomaly, but it feels more like," his voice faltered, "like something's trying to lock onto us." Maya's mind raced. The message was no accident, but what was the source? A weapon? A trap? Or something much older? It was hard to know with the data so incomplete, and every second they were drifting closer into the unknown. "Take us to the outer edge of the system," Maya ordered. "Let's see if we can get a clearer picture before we go any deeper." As the Resolve altered its course and the darkness of space enveloped them further, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The tension on the bridge was palpable as the ship's sensors picked up an enormous energy spike from the planet at the center of the signal's origin. The planet itself was barren, a dull grey orb surrounded by a sparse asteroid field, its surface cracked and scarred. It looked as if time itself had forgotten it. But there was something alive about the place, something that pulsed beneath the dead surface, calling them in. "We're getting strange readings," Lieutenant Finn Harper, the ship's sensor officer, reported, eyes glued to his screen. "It's not natural. The readings suggest something's buried deep within the planet, something powerful." Maya exchanged a look with Laia, who stood nearby, her arms crossed as she stared at the planet, her brow furrowed. "Could it be an alien outpost?" Laia asked. "It's possible," Maya said, her voice low. "But it doesn't feel like an outpost. There's something old about it. I'm not sure we're the first ones to answer this call." The tension on the bridge became palpable. The entire crew felt it, the creeping dread of stepping into the unknown. But Maya knew one thing for certain. There was no turning back now. "Prepare for landing," Maya ordered, her voice cutting through the murmurs of doubt. "Everyone get ready. We go in fast and hard. I want a full scan of the area once we get the surface. We're not making any assumptions." The crew sprang into action, securing their stations and preparing for the landing. Maya's gaze shifted to the planet below once again. The sight of the dead world sent a shiver down her spine, but she couldn't afford to be afraid. She had been in the depths of space before, had seen things that would shake a lesser mind to its core. But this felt different. As the Resolve descended toward the planet's surface, the sky ahead seemed to darken, not from clouds, but from the sheer weight of the unknown pressing in on them. For a moment, everything felt still, as though the universe itself was holding its breath. Then, without warning, the calm was shattered. The ship jolted violently as a shockwave of energy rippled through the hull. Warning lights flashed across the bridge, and the ship's systems screamed in alarm. "Captain, something's coming," Finn shouted, his voice strained as the ship was rocked again. Maya's eyes widened. It wasn't just a signal. It was a warning, and now they were part of it. The Resolve lurched again, the ship groaning under the strain of an unseen force. Captain Maya Towson gripped the armrests of her chair, teeth clenched as the crew scrambled to regain control. The ship's hull vibrated with a low, resonant hum that seemed to reverberate through every bone in her body. They were still a few kilometers above the surface, but the tremors felt as though the planet itself was alive, reaching out to them. "Report," Maya barked. "Power loss in the aft systems." Marcus Jensen's voice came over the comms, tinged with panic. "We've lost half our shields, Captain. Something's disrupting the ship's energy flow. It's like—" His words were cut off by another violent jolt, knocking several crew members off balance. "Get it under control," Maya shouted. "Leia, status on the surface." Leia Vance was already at the communications console, her fingers flying across the keys as she sifted through the data streams. Her face was pale, eyes wide with disbelief. "Captain, I don't know what's happening down there. There's an energy pulse radiating from the surface, stronger than anything we've ever seen. It's alive." Maya's heart skipped a beat. A planet that was alive. The thought was terrifying, but it also confirmed something she had suspected since the moment they had detected the first anomalies. This wasn't just an ancient outpost or a forgotten ruin. This was something much worse. Suddenly, the comm system crackled to life, filling the bridge with a garbled transmission. A deep, guttural voice speaking in an alien tongue, distorted but unmistakable. "They come, destroyers. Do not awaken them." The voice trailed off, replaced by a series of sharp, mechanical noises. "Turn that off," Maya ordered, but it was too late. The voice had already begun to echo in her mind, a relentless, insistent whisper that seemed to be pulling at her thoughts. Something deep inside the planet had heard their arrival and was responding in kind. "Captain, we can't hold steady," Marcus reported, his voice strained. "The ship's systems are failing faster than we can repair them. If we don't land now, we're going to lose everything." Maya's mind raced. They couldn't afford to turn back. Not now. The signal, the ancient warnings, and the destruction they had already seen. Everything pointed to something terrible beneath the surface. But it was too late to hesitate. They had come this far. "Prepare for emergency landing." "We can't stay in the air any longer," she ordered, voice firm. "Everyone brace for impact." The Resolve descended, but the turbulence intensified. Energy pulses slammed into the hull, rattling the ship as it fought to maintain its course. Outside, the planet's surface came into view, desolate, cracked, and scarred by long-forgotten cataclysms. A jagged mountain range loomed ahead, casting long, twisted shadows over the landscape. With a final violent lurch, the ship's landing gear slammed into the surface, sending a shockwave through the crew. The ship skidded across the cracked ground, sparks flying as metal scraped against stone, before coming to a shuddering stop. Maya's breath was ragged, her pulse racing. She stood quickly, scanning the bridge with a piercing gaze. Everyone suit up. "We're going in. Leia, Finn, you're with me. I want a full scan of the area now." Leia and Finn exchanged a quick look before moving to their stations, gathering their gear. Maya felt her chest tighten as she strapped on her own suit, the weight of her decisions pressing heavily on her. They had landed in a world that had been forgotten, a world that had waited for something, or someone, to awaken it. But the message was clear now, that Esarith had tried to contain something terrible here, and whatever had been locked away was stirring. As the airlock hissed open, a cold breeze greeted them, sharp and dry. The surface of the planet was desolate, littered with jagged rocks, and the remnants of ancient structures half buried in the shifting sands. No signs of life, no movement, yet Maya could feel it, the presence of something watching them, something waiting. "Stay sharp," Maya murmured as she led the team outside. The sand underfoot felt wrong, as if it had been disturbed by an unseen force. The landscape stretched endlessly before them, but in the distance, rising out of the desolation, was a structure. Tall, dark, and imposing, it seemed to beckon them forward, its outline barely visible through the haze of swirling dust. Without a word, Maya motioned for the team to advance, their boots crunching on the strange terrain. With every step they took, the air seemed to grow heavier, as though the planet itself was pulling them deeper into its grasp. The call had been answered, and now the real nightmare would begin. The eerie silence of the alien planet pressed in on Captain Maya Towson and her team as they made their way toward the dark structure rising in the distance. Each step felt heavier, the weight of the unknown bearing down on them. The air was thin, and despite their environmental suits, the chill that ran through the atmosphere seemed to seep deep into their bones. The landscape was barren, broken, but there was a pulse beneath it, a sensation of something alive beneath the surface, watching, waiting. Maya's mind raced. She'd seen firsthand the destructive potential of an alien civilization, but this felt different. This felt personal. The planet, or whatever had once inhabited it, had been waiting for them. It wasn't just a cry for help, it was a summons. The towering structure loomed ahead, its jagged edges reaching toward the sky like claws. It wasn't like anything Maya had seen before. There were no obvious windows, no signs of habitation, just endless, unbroken stone, carved with symbols that none of the crew could decipher. As they approached the entrance, the ground trembled again, sending ripples through the air as though something beneath the planet's crust had stirred in response to their presence. "We're not alone," Laya said, her voice low, tense. She had that far-off look in her eyes, the same look that everyone had gotten since the moment they had touched down. The feeling of being hunted. "Something's down there. I can feel it." Maya nodded, her own instincts flaring. She felt it too. It was as if the planet itself were alive, pulsing with a terrible consciousness that was aware of their every movement. But they had no choice but to continue. The signal had led them here, and the team had to uncover the truth. "Keep your weapons ready," Maya ordered, her voice sharp. "We don't know what's inside." They passed through the enormous archway of the structure, the air growing colder as they entered. The interior was vast, cavernous, with walls that seemed to stretch endlessly into shadow. Strange symbols, the same as those on the outside, covered every surface, glowing faintly with an unnatural light. It wasn't the dull glow of ancient tech. This was something alive, something waiting. "Anything on the scanners?" Maya asked, her eyes scanning the walls for any signs of movement. "Nothing," Finn Harper replied, his voice strained. "This place doesn't make sense. No para-readings, no signs of life. But," he paused, staring at his scanner, brow furrowed. "There's something here. Just barely detectable. It's faint, like a heartbeat, but it's there." A chill ran down Maya's spine. It wasn't a machine. It wasn't a structure. It was alive. "Move forward," Maya commanded, her heart pounding in her chest. "We need to find the source of that pulse." As they ventured deeper into the structure, the air grew thicker, the sense of dread pressing in on them from all sides. The walls seemed to close in, and the pulse grew stronger, louder, like the beating of an ancient heart. Maya's steps grew slower as she approached what appeared to be a large chamber, at the center of the structure. It was unlike anything she had imagined. There, in the center, was a massive twisted device, a monstrous, living construct of organic and mechanical parts that pulsed with dark energy. And it was from this device that the signal had originated. The truth hit Maya like a punch to the gut. This wasn't a simple distress signal. It wasn't a call for help. This was a warning, a cry from the past, a desperate attempt to keep something from being unleashed. She was standing at the very heart of the Voidborn, the monsters of myth that the Exeroth had tried to contain for millennia. Captain. Laya's voice cracked through the haze of realization, pulling Maya from her thoughts. Laya pointed to the walls. The symbols weren't just markings. They were warnings. But it was too late. The device in the center of the chamber shuddered, the pulse growing louder and faster. Something was coming. Get back! Maya shouted, but the ground trembled beneath their feet, and the chamber suddenly came to life. The walls cracked open, and from the darkness poured waves of inky blackness, shifting, writhing tendrils of void energy that seemed to tear through the very fabric of reality. It was too late to escape. The Voidborn had awoken, and they were coming for humanity. As the walls around them shifted and contorted, Maya realized they were no longer just explorers. They were the hunted, and now the war for survival had truly begun. The darkness exploded around them. The walls of the chamber cracked open, revealing a vast maw of shifting black tendrils and unnatural energy. The air itself seemed to ripple as if reality were bending and warping in response to the Voidborn's awakening. Maya's heart raced as the pulse of the planet grew louder, the rhythmic beat now deafening in her ears. Move now! Maya shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. The crew snapped into action, their instincts honed by countless battles, but the terror in their eyes was undeniable. They could feel it. Something ancient, something beyond comprehension, was rising. Laya, Finn, and Maya scrambled toward the exit, but the tendrils of shadow twisted and surged forward, coiling through the air like sentient serpents. The first tendril lashed out, striking the ground where Maya had stood just a moment ago. The impact sent a shockwave through the chamber, causing the floor to crack and tremble beneath them. Captain, we can't outrun this. Finn yelled as he swung his weapon at a tendril that slithered toward him. The blast barely caused it to flinch. Maya's mind raced, trying to process the situation, to find a way to fight back. But she knew one thing for certain: conventional weapons would do nothing against these abominations. The very air seemed to resist their fire, their efforts futile against the incomprehensible power that had been unleashed. The device, Maya yelled. We need to shut it down. It's the source. Without hesitation, the crew turned back toward the pulsating machine at the center of the chamber. The Voidborn's power emanated from it like a heartbeat, a force so overwhelming that it seemed to reach into their very souls. The tendrils continued to surge around them, but Maya steeled herself. They had no choice. If they didn't stop this, the planet, and possibly the entire galaxy, would be consumed. Laya sprinted ahead, cutting through the air with her rifle, but her shots barely made a dent in the writhing mass. The machine seemed alive, shifting in response to every movement they made. Maya's pulse quickened as she neared it, the ground trembling with each step, the pulse from the device growing ever stronger, almost as if it were feeding off their fear. They reached the machine, and Maya's eyes scanned its surface. Strange symbols. No, not symbols, runes, glowing with an eerie light, covered the entire structure. The very air around them crackled with energy as the runes pulsed in time with the device's heartbeat. There's no manual override. Laya shouted, panic creeping into her voice as she tried to find some way to stop it. It's all organic. It's alive. We don't need a manual override. Maya snapped, her mind racing. She had seen technology like this before, alien constructs that merged biology with mechanics. The Exaroth had kept records of such things, systems that could only be disabled by understanding their very essence. Maya stepped forward, her hand outstretched, and placed it gently on the machine's surface. The moment her fingers made contact, the runes flared brighter, and the device thrummed with renewed intensity. Pain seared through her arm as though the machine was probing her very thoughts. But she didn't pull back. She had to find the core, the heart of the Voidborn. "Captain." Laya called, but Maya's focus was absolute, her mind working quickly to decipher the alien patterns. Then it clicked. The device wasn't just a source of power, it was a prison. The runes, the pulsing energy, they were holding something back. "Hold them off." Maya shouted, her voice a command, her mind already moving. "I can feel the core. It's connected to the planet. If we don't sever the link now, this will never stop." As Laya and Finn took defensive positions, firing at the ever-growing tendrils that reached toward them, Maya focused her attention inward. She reached into the core of the device, feeling for the point where its power was anchored. She could almost hear the Voidborn now, their presence swirling at the edge of her consciousness, hungry, relentless. Her fingers moved along the surface of the device, tracing the network of power that pulsed beneath. She had to sever it, destroy the link between the device and the Voidborn. If she could do that, they might have a chance to stop whatever horrors were about to be unleashed. Suddenly, the machine screamed, an inhuman, screeching wail that tore through the chamber, shaking the ground beneath them. Maya's heart skipped a beat as she realized what was happening. The Voidborn were fighting back. The ancient device had been holding them captive, but now, in the moment of its awakening, it was losing control. The floodgates were opening. "Captain." Laya's voice cracked as she fired again, this time hitting a tendril that was creeping too close for comfort. "We don't have much time." Maya's fingers trembled, but she pressed on. If she failed, everything would be lost. The Voidborn would escape, and there would be no force in the galaxy strong enough to stop them. With a final, desperate push, Maya severed the link. For a moment, everything went silent. Then the entire structure began to collapse. The silence that followed was deafening. The pulsating hum of the device, the thrashing tendrils, the heart-pounding rhythm of the planet itself, all of it stopped, as though the world had drawn a single, collective breath. Maya stood motionless, her hand still pressed against the now-still surface of the device, her pulse racing. The tension in the air felt like it might snap, the calm before the storm, or perhaps the eye of the storm itself. Then the silence shattered. A massive shockwave rippled through the structure, tearing the floor beneath Maya's feet as the walls groaned and cracked. The very bones of the planet were rebelling, shaking in fury as though the surface itself were splitting apart. The machine, once a beacon of dark power, now sputtered and sparked, its light flickering erratically before dimming completely. Maya staggered backward, her heart racing in her chest, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. The link had been severed, but at what cost? The planet was coming undone, and she could feel the immense pressure of that final moment of release. It wasn't over. "Captain." Laya shouted, her voice strained as she and Finn fought to hold their ground. The tendrils that had previously attacked now writhed violently, but they no longer sought the crew. Instead, they lashed out at the walls, trying to break free, attempting to reach toward the surface. The resolve was waiting. Maya could feel it in her bones, the sense of urgency, of time running out. They had to leave before the entire planet imploded, but the Voidborn were not done. They were just awakening. "We need to go now," Maya ordered, breaking from her trance. The air was thick with the tension of the approaching disaster. "Laia, Finn, get to the ship. I'll cover you." Without waiting for a response, Maya turned toward the darkened machine, which was now sparking violently. The runes that had once glowed with such malevolent power were dimming, but not fading, becoming more erratic, unstable. Whatever had been held back was struggling to escape, fighting against the crumbling prison that had kept it locked away for eons. The ground beneath them shuddered once more. The structure began to collapse in earnest, with massive chunks of stone falling from above, crushing the floor beneath their feet. The walls, once towering and proud, were buckling under the immense strain of the planet's instability. Maya sprinted toward the exit, but the ground split wide open before her, sending her crashing to the ground. She slid across the broken surface, feeling the jagged rocks scrape against her suit, the cold, metallic taste of fear rising in her throat. "Captain." Finn's voice echoed through the comms, but the interference was getting worse by the second. The ship, their only escape, was still too far. Every step toward it felt like an eternity. Maya's eyes darted to the horizon, where the ship hovered in the sky, waiting for them. She could hear the crackling of the energy pulse rising from the depths of the planet. It was a force beyond anything she had ever encountered, but it was also the only way out. "Move!" Maya shouted as she pushed herself to her feet, ignoring the tremors in the ground. Her heart thudded in her chest, her thoughts a blur of action. There was no time to waste. Laia and Finn had made it halfway to the ship, but the planet was coming apart faster than they anticipated. The ground beneath their feet continued to crack, sending up clouds of dust and debris, while the towering remnants of the alien structure teetered on the brink of collapse. "Mulia." Laia's voice was barely audible through the distortion of static. "We can't make it. Get to the ship. Now." Maya's blood ran cold. They couldn't afford to lose anyone. She pushed herself to run faster, faster than she ever thought possible, the ground beneath her shaking, the void energy at her back threatening to swallow everything. With every step she took, the weight of the collapsing planet grew heavier, and the Voidborn, the creatures that had been locked away, were stirring beneath the surface, as though they were rising from the very core of the planet to claim their freedom. She reached the others just as the sky above them seemed to crack open. A violent pulse of energy exploded from the heart of the planet, sending a shockwave across the landscape. The air grew thick with pressure, and the distant roar of an inhuman wail echoed from the depths of the planet. The Voidborn had found their way out, and they were angry. "Move!" Maya shouted one last time, and they all broke into a sprint toward the ship, the pulse of the planet's destruction at their heels. With a final desperate leap, Maya and the crew reached the ship's airlock just as the ground beneath them erupted in a violent explosion of rock and energy. The Resolver's engines roared to life, lifting them into the air as the planet's surface tore itself apart. But as they rose higher, Maya's eyes lingered on the world below, now consumed by chaos. The Voidborn had been freed, but so had the nightmares of a long-dead civilization. The battle was far from over. The Resolve ascended rapidly, the planet's surface shrinking into a jagged, fiery abyss as the shockwave of destruction continued to ripple outward. Maya Talcin, breathless from the desperate scramble to escape, gripped the console in front of her. Her heart pounded, not just from the close call, but from the realization that the worst was yet to come. The Voidborn were free, and they had felt their first taste of freedom. Laia Vance was at the communications array, frantically scanning the space around them. "Captain, I'm picking up strange energy signatures, moving fast. They're not just on the planet's surface. They'd already left the atmosphere." Maya turned to her, the gravity of her words sinking in. "How is that possible? We've just left the planet's orbit. Nothing should be able to." "It's not like anything I've seen before." Laia cut in, her fingers dancing over the console. "It's as if—" She stopped mid-sentence, eyes widening. "They're not moving like ships. It's more like they're folding space, shifting through it. It's instantaneous." Maya's mind raced. The Exarith records had spoken of creatures capable of manipulating space itself, of warping reality to suit their needs. But they had thought the stories were myths. She had to fight the urge to shake her head in disbelief. There was no time for doubt. These were the Voidborn, and they were coming for humanity. "Bring us out of here, Marcus," Maya ordered, her voice steady despite the storm of thoughts swirling in her mind. Marcus Jensen, the ship's pilot, didn't hesitate. His hands flew across the controls, and the resolve banked sharply, accelerating into the cold void of space. But it wasn't fast enough. The feeling of something pressing against them, of being hunted, gnawed at the back of Maya's mind. "Maya," Finn Harper's voice came over the comms, his voice thick with worry. "The Voidborn aren't just chasing us. They're hunting us. And if they can fold space like that—" He trailed off. "There's nowhere we can run." Maya's jaw clenched. Finn was right. The Voidborn had no need for ships. No need for engines or technology. They were beings of pure, unfathomable power, and they had already begun to leave their mark on the universe. A pulse of energy rippled through space, a faint but undeniable vibration. She could feel it in her bones. It was as if the very fabric of the cosmos was shuddering under their presence. "We're not running. We're going to fight," Maya said, her tone unwavering. Laia shot a worried glance toward her, then returned to the console, desperately trying to find a way to track the Voidborn's movements. "I'm trying to lock onto their energy signatures. But they're blurring. It's like they're moving between dimensions. We can't track them, and the faster we go, the farther they get ahead." Maya stood, her back straight and determined. "If we can't outrun them, then we need to outsmart them." She turned to Marcus. "Bring us to the nearest jump point. I want us in hyperspace as soon as possible. We'll need the extra speed to shake them off. Laia, Finn, be ready. We'll have to act fast when we drop back into real space." The crew nodded in unison, knowing the stakes were higher than ever before. Time was running out, and they could feel the Voidborn closing in, no longer constrained by the physical laws that governed them. As Marcus adjusted the controls, the Resolve shot forward, leaving the remnants of the destroyed planet far behind. The jump point, a cluster of star systems, far from the devastation they had just left, was their best hope. It was a risky maneuver, one that could either give them the time they needed or lead them into even greater danger. Maya looked out at the vastness of space, her mind sharpening. There was no question now. Humanity was in the fight of its life. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized just how little she truly knew about the Voidborn. They weren't just an alien race. They were an idea, a force of destruction that transcended anything the galaxy had encountered before. They weren't motivated by conquest or power. They were driven by something far darker. And they wouldn't stop until every last trace of humanity was erased. "Captain," Laia said, breaking her thoughts, "I've found a way to mask our signature temporarily. If we can make the jump quickly enough, we might be able to hide our location long enough to plan our next move." "Do it," Maya ordered. She took one last look at the view outside the observation deck, the distant stars, the black void stretching into eternity. It was a terrifying thought. They were truly alone now, with no allies, no help, and no safe haven. But Maya wasn't about to give up. She had her crew. She had their resolve. And together, they were going to stop the Voidborn from consuming everything they held dear. Ready to jump in 5, Marcus announced, his fingers flying over the controls. Maya inhaled deeply, steadying her nerves. 5 seconds. Let's show them what humanity is capable of. The cold emptiness of space stretched out before them as the Resolve rocketed toward the jump point. Maya stood at the helm, her eyes locked onto the view screen, watching the stars streak by. The sound of the ship's engines humming through the vastness of space was the only thing that kept her grounded in the moment. But her mind wasn't on the ship or the distant stars. It was on the battle that was coming. Behind her, the crew was tense, their every movement shadowed by the unrelenting fear of the Voidborn closing in. Lyra worked furiously at the communications array, trying to pinpoint any signs of their pursuers. Finn and Marcus were at their posts, ready for anything. There was no room for error. Jumping in 3, Marcus's voice rang through the command deck, his hands steady on the controls. Maya's heart skipped a beat as the countdown began. They had no idea what would greet them when they made the jump. Would they be able to outrun the Voidborn? Or would the monsters find a way to tear through hyperspace and hunt them down once more? 2, Marcus continued. Maya closed her eyes for just a second, breathing in deep, steadying herself. The weight of the mission was heavier than ever, but she couldn't afford to second-guess herself. Humanity's last chance rested on their shoulders. 1. The ship lurched forward, the stars outside bending and warping as they entered hyperspace. The familiar feeling of acceleration and distortion enveloped the crew, but Maya didn't allow herself to relax. The sense of being hunted still clung to her like a second skin, and she could feel the Voidborn, those ancient, otherworldly predators, waiting for them on the other side. They needed a plan. They needed an advantage, but they were running out of time. Lyra's voice broke through the silence, her words carrying the weight of urgency. Captain, I've traced their movements again. They're still following us, closer than I thought. They're adapting faster than we can outrun them. Maya's blood ran cold. How? It's like they can feel the jump points. Lyra continued, her eyes wide with disbelief. Every time we try to make a jump, their presence is almost immediately detected. They're folding through space like they're already inside the jump corridors. That horrifying realization struck Maya like a hammer. The Voidborn weren't just hunting them. They had already begun to manipulate the very fabric of hyperspace itself, crossing the distance between them faster than human technology could ever hope to match. We're being tracked, Finn said grimly, looking at the tactical display. There's no safe place left. We have to fight. The tension in the room escalated. Maya's hands clenched into fists. They were trapped in a way they'd never faced before. If the Voidborn could bend space to their will, there was no place to hide. No corner of the galaxy was safe. But she wasn't about to give up. Humanity had fought against impossible odds before, and they would do it again. They had to. Prepare for emergency evasive maneuvers, Maya ordered, her voice cutting through the tension. We'll fight them here, and we'll make it count. Lyra, I need everything you've got on the Voidborn. We're not running anymore. We're going to make a stand. Lyra nodded, her face grim. I'll work on a plan to counter their energy signatures. If we can block their folding abilities, we might have a shot at slowing them down long enough to strike. Finn moved to the weapons station, his hands already working. I'll start adjusting the ship's weapons, but I'm not sure we can hurt them with conventional firepower. We'll need something more. We'll figure it out, Maya said, determination flaring in her chest. We don't have any other option. The Resolve continued to streak through hyperspace, but Maya could feel the Voidborn getting closer, their presence pressing in on them, like a wall of pure malice and hunger. They were smart, adaptive, and relentless, everything humanity had feared about them. But one thing they underestimated was the human spirit. Humanity didn't back down when faced with extinction. They fought, and Maya would make sure they fought with everything they had. "Captain," Marcus called from the helm. "I'm detecting a ripple in space ahead of us. It's them. They're closing in." Maya's eyes narrowed. The time for running was over. "Ready the weapons, Finn. Leia, get that signature mask up and running. Everyone else, brace yourselves. We're not just going to survive. We're going to win." The ship's systems hummed to life as the crew prepared for what would likely be their final battle. As the Resolve tore through hyperspace, Maya took a deep breath, preparing herself for the fight of their lives. The Voidborn were coming, and they were bringing their wrath. But Maya knew one thing with absolute certainty. Humanity wouldn't go down without a fight. And this time, they were ready. The Resolve burst from hyperspace, and the vast void of space greeted them. Ahead, the Voidborn were waiting, ready to make their final move. Maya's resolve hardened as she stepped toward the command console. The battle for survival had begun.